Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 931, The High Sun Palace. The Long Province was a large province located on the western portion of the Jin Empire. It has tall and expansive mountains, areas filled with toxic miasma, and venomous animals of all kinds. This province was different from other areas of the empire. Only the illustrious righteous Tao sect, the High Sun Palace, and one of the 10 great devilish sects, the Devilwood sect, ruled over this large area. No external powers were able to involve themselves with the province. As native cultivation factions only consisted of small sects and schools, they weren't able to pose the slightest threat to these two vast and powerful sects, and were forced to subject themselves under the control of either sect for protection. As a result, the region was split into the west and east. In the west was the Heaven Peak mountain range where the High Sun Palace ruled. The mountain range spanned over 100,000 kilometers of wilderness. The palace was located on a mountain named South Sky Mountain at the very center of the mountain range. Tens of thousands of the sect's disciples resided in the various mountains nearby. With the addition of the surrounding mountains acting as a natural fortress, no cultivators dared to attack the High Sun Palace. Even particularly reckless individuals were unable to break through the grand spell formation surrounding the mountain, which consisted of 13 layers of fearsome restrictions. But one day, when a group of High Sun Palace disciples flew out from the Heaven Peak mountain range, an azure streak suddenly flashed from the top of an unknown mountain nearby. There was an azure-robed youth that stood on a huge boulder with his hands held behind his back. He was silently staring at the group of disciples from behind. Monarch Soul Divergent's voice echoed through the youth's mind. "Youngster Han, do you truly plan on acting against the High Sun Palace? The sect is amongst the top sects of the 10 great righteous sects of the Jin Empire. It doesn't seem wise to provoke them." Han Li indifferently said, "I know, but we've already collected most of the materials we need for the Triflame fan. Now, we are only missing the vast young bird's plume feather and the scarlet fire flood dragon scales. We already acquired information from the market city that many ferocious flood dragons have begun devouring cultivators on the eastern coast of the Jin Empire, and there seemed to be a red flood dragon amongst them. Even if it isn't the scarlet flame flood dragon, we may as well try our luck and see if it is another fire attribute flood dragon. As for the vast young bird, we've looked through all the markets in the south to find that only the High Sun Palace raised it. Where else would we get its plume feather? I have no choice but to risk provoking them. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't steal the plume, but why don't you deal with them out in the open instead? With your current mid-nascent soul cultivation and the rare treasures in your possession, they might be willing to sell it with consideration of your might." Monarch Soul Divergence said with a chuckle. Han Li let out a cold laugh and said, "Stop joking, senior. An exchange will require both sides to have nearly equivalent strength. I am only a mid-nascent soul cultivator and they have a late-nascent soul cultivator in their ranks. How could a junior like me catch their attention? Furthermore, the High Sun Palace's 2 vast young birds are considered a legacy of theirs. They wouldn't allow me to pluck its feather and cause a great decrease in its cultivation. If I brought out lowly treasures, they wouldn't be valuable enough to be worthy of their consideration, but if I brought out rare treasures instead, they would be tempted to kill me over it. Since I am a mere vagrant cultivator, they don't need to give me much consideration given the scope of their power. I am not willing to risk my safety over their whims. If I were a late nascent soul cultivator, I might be willing to give it a try." Monarch Soul Divergence pondered in silence for a spell and said, "Your words are reasonable. However, you've been wandering around the edge of the mountain range for over 10 days. Could it be you're waiting for a vast young bird to fly out? But from your actions, it also seems like you're looking for something. Just what are you planning?" Han Li's eyes wavered and he smiled, saying, "It's nothing. I'm only finding a suitable place to put down a trap." "Set up a trap. Since you dared to act against the High Sun Palace, it is right to be stealthy. Tell me about your plans." Han Li glanced at the heart of the mountain range and chuckled. Wait until I find a suitable location and I'll tell you about it in detail. They have a larger and a smaller vast young bird. I wonder which one is more suitable to trap. Monarch's Soul Divergence lazily asked, what's the point of talking about it? I hear the larger vast young bird is a grade 8 demon bird. Do you think you'll be able to capture it in a short amount of time? Han Li pondered for a moment and then nodded. That's right. The only reason why birds of antiquity would remain under the control of the High Sun Palace is because their intelligence is difficult to awaken and they are unable to take human form in the mortal realm. I hear the smaller of the two birds should be weaker by an entire grade, so it should be easier to deal with. With a regretful tone, Monarch's Soul Divergence mentioned, but if you use the plume of the grade 8 vast young bird to refine the triflame fan, its might would be even greater. Han Li shook his head. Forget it. Nothing in this world is perfect. It is simply too dangerous to deal with the grade 8 vast young bird. In the extra time it would take, I fear I would alarm many High Sun Palace disciples. I don't want to repeat what happened in the soaring sky plains. Monarch's Soul Divergence chuckled. Yes, that sounds right. But regardless of their size, they will only occasionally fly out from the High Sun Palace. How do you plan on capturing one of the birds? Han Li coldly smiled and said, don't worry. I've already used the Dream Tear technique on one of their disciples. Fearing that the birds would become difficult to control in prolonged confinement, the sect releases the birds every month to stretch their wings. This will be our opportunity to act. Since you already know this, there is no use for any of my advice. However, you mustn't take too long and miss the trade fair at the Jin Empire's capital city. It should have many materials that I'm missing for my puppet body. Monarch's Soul Divergence warned. The capital trade fair is one of the 3 great trade fairs in the Jin Empire and only occurs once every 10 years. I wouldn't want to miss it in any case. When this is done, I'll hurry over to the Empire capital and afterwards, we'll have to find those flood dragons on the Empire's east shore. Han Li said his future plans with a calm tone. That will do. But nevertheless, your recent actions have earned my respect. I originally believed you would need at least 4 years in order to reach your current collection of materials. I didn't think that you'd be able to effectively tackle the problem from 2 angles. With your hidden and open methods, you were able to gather most of the items you needed in only a single year. TCH, your decisiveness to act are beyond my expectations. It was clear from Monarch's Soul Divergence's voice that he was greatly satisfied with Han Li's methods. Han Li paused for a moment as his expression stirred. He then said, I also wish to use a slower, more reliable method to look for materials, but time was limited. Although Xianxia's primal soul has the support of the soul-nurturing wood, its effects are clearly too weak. If I wish to create your nascent soul-grade puppet body, I'll need to be as quick as possible. After a wry chuckle, Monarch's Soul Divergence helplessly said, so you were being considerate. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. I can only last 3 or 4 years at most. My primal soul is on the verge of scattering. But at the speed that you're collecting materials, I have high hopes my puppet body will be refined before I reincarnate. After letting out a long sigh, Han Li said with a serious tone, ever since I've met Xianxia, you've helped me many times. I'm not a heartless person and I've committed these acts of kindness to memory. I will do my utmost to fulfill your dreams. Deeply touched, Monarch's Soul Divergence also let out a sigh and honestly said, in truth, I was only helping you in self-preservation. After all, if I were to fall into someone else's hands, I feared that nothing good would come of it. Han Li smiled and in a flash of azure light, his body disappeared in the wind. 2 days later, Han Li discovered a small valley filled with peach trees. The valley was stained pink from the blooming peach blossoms that littered it. Han Li floated above the valley and observed it in its entirety, then releasing his spiritual sense to cover a 50-kilometer area. With an expression of satisfaction, he flew to the center of the peach tree forest and muttered, not bad, this place is quite remote and there are no High Sun Palace cultivators stationed nearby. This valley is ideal to place down a spell formation. Then without another word, Han Li began to set himself to work. In a single breath, 8 sets of various formation flags and plates were placed in the forest. 5 of these formations were meant to conceal auras and isolate qi from the outside, while 3 of them meant to restrain the spell formation. Additionally, he placed down an illusion formation, covering the true appearance of most of the forest. Monarch Soul Divergence viewed this with great curiosity, but barely managed to keep himself from asking any questions. With everything set up, Han Li went to the center of the peach tree forest and sat down cross-legged, entering a meditative state. Chapter 932, Vast Young Bird. Three days passed, and Han Li stirred awake from meditation. He raised his head toward the night sky, and a moonlight stone appeared in his hand. He flung it into the air, and sparkles of moonlight illuminated the nearby peach trees. Without the slightest noise, he then took out a meter chunk of red coral and tossed it down before planting rainbow skirt grass on top of it. "This is the method that you've prepared." Although he had seen Han Li feed the gold-devouring beetles with the grass to miraculous effect, he was very baffled to see it used now. When Han Li heard this question, he smiled and said, "In truth, this grass has another name, the demon lure grass. Xianxia should know what I plan on using it for." Demon lure grass? Could it be? Monarch Soul Divergence suddenly dawned with realization. That's right. In 6 days, the smaller Vast Young Bird will be released, and the grass will bloom as well, releasing its bewitching scent. When the time comes, Han Li coldly snickered. Fang Chu was mid-foundation establishment High Sun Palace cultivator. There were nearly 1,000 of his kind that could be found in the entirety of the sect. It was reasonable to say that he was an unremarkable character, but in truth, this was quite the opposite. Let alone other foundation establishment cultivators, even core formation stage martial seniors had to treat him politely, and even when benefits arose in the palace, he would be the first foundation establishment disciple to be considered. Fang Chu's unusually high standing in the High Sun Palace was something he was rather proud of, though this was all due to his duties as the caretaker for the sect's smaller Vast Young Bird. He possessed an innate special ability to communicate with birds, and were it not for this rare and irreplaceable talent, he wouldn't have been assigned this task. After all, as the bird's caretaker, he had a certain degree of control over it, something that was heavily valued by the sect. Although this was the weaker of the two sects' Vast Young Birds, it was still able to easily defeat late core formation cultivators and directly pursue nascent soul cultivators. It was no wonder the bird was held with such reverence. Over the 30 years Fang Chu had cared for the bird, he would stay next to it at all times, even cut his cultivation time to follow after the spirit bird when it would liberate its wings, during which not a single problem arose. As this was only another routine flight, he didn't feel the need to be worried. With the surrounding 50,000 kilometers of the Heaven Peak mountain range were all under the control of the High Sun Palace, what could possibly happen? With those leisurely thoughts in mind, he distantly followed after the Vast Young Bird on an early morning. The Vast Young Bird was only about 3 meters long, but its long tail feathers made up over half of its length. From a distance, the bird appeared like a huge peacock, but there wasn't one with such beautiful fire-red feathers. The bird was ecstatic. After it was released from the restrictions of the High Sun Palace, it flapped its fire-red wings and continuously flew circles in the sky to ensure no one was following it. With ordinary methods, Fang Chu wouldn't have been able to conceal himself from the bird's spiritual sense, but he was using a qi concealment talisman that the sect had specially refined. As such, he was able to follow after the bird without any fear of being discovered in spite his shallow cultivation. When the bird let out a clear cry, Fang Chu wore a knowing smile. He had spent a long time with it and knew the Vast Young Bird was extremely happy at the moment. After this trip, the bird would be docile for the next half-month. As a result, the bird calmly circled the sky above the High Sun Palace for a long while before flying away. Fang Chu didn't feel the slightest concern. As per its usual habits, the bird would fly a large circle around the sect before turning satisfied. As it was a leisurely flight, he could follow after it. But after 15 kilometers, there was a sudden change in course. The Vast Young Bird suddenly stopped in its delighted flight with a harsh shriek. Fang Chu was stunned when he heard this. Before he realized what had happened, He saw the bird quickly spreading out its wings and its body combusted, surrounding itself in a meter layer of scarlet flames. Several blurs later, it was already over a kilometer away. Fang Chu was shocked to the core when he saw this. By the time he recollected himself, he hastily took out a jade tile and poured all of his spiritual sense into it. It promptly released a strange bird song in an attempt to call the bird back. The vast young bird heard it and hesitated for a moment, only to noisily caw before disappearing off into the horizon. When Fang Chu saw this, his face turned bloodlessly pale and he simply floated in the air, bewildered at what to do. But soon, he thought of something and took out a sound transmission talisman from his storage pouch before he hastily shouted something. Then, he flung the charm into the air and it streaked back in fiery light towards the direction of the High Sun Palace. He gritted his teeth and set off in the direction that the vast young bird disappeared in. Despite knowing that it was useless for him to pursue it, if he was waiting idly when his martial ancestor found him, he would be severely punished. As Fang Chu hurriedly gave chase, the other spirit beasts in the Heaven Peak mountain range let out an uproar. In the northern part of the mountain range, many low-grade High Sun Palace disciples were strenuously attempting to hold down the huge vultures they were riding. The riders had suddenly lost control of these low-grade spirit birds as they attempted to take off in a different direction, and soon, all of them were drenched in their own sweat in their efforts to keep control of their mad steeds. In a hidden cave at the edge of the mountain range, there was a masked cultivator in yellow-green robes. He was holding down a black, foot-long spider with a large hand made of green light. He looked at the enraged, snarling spider with complete confusion. On South Heaven Peak, inside a concealed hall in the High Sun Palace, an old woman wearing purple robes was stroking the sex's other vast young bird, an exact copy of the other bird apart from its larger size. It had suddenly grown restless without warning. Were it not for her excessive use of spell seals to pacify the bird, it would have flown out from the hall. She couldn't help but wear an odd expression in response. Fang Chu used his magic power without reserve as he gave chase. The vast young bird had already disappeared without a trace, but the jade medallion in his hand was able to sense the bird's location so long as it was within the Heaven Peak mountain range. But just after he gave pursuit, he discovered something incredibly shocking. He saw a few low-grade demon beasts emerge from well-hidden burrows and flew off in the same direction as the vast young bird with reckless abandon. In a short amount of time, it formed a wave of demon beasts, some of which were rarely ever seen. However, Feng Chu had nothing to fear as the Sect's high-grade cultivators had already eliminated all high-grade demon beasts from the mountain that could pose a threat to the vast young birds. Regardless, Fang Chu felt even more uneasy after seeing that the mountain beasts had also lost control. In a hidden valley, thousands of kilometers away, Han Li was sitting cross-legged on the ground. There was a chunk of coral in front of him along with rainbow skirt grass wrapped in red light. At that moment, Han Li's attention wasn't focused on the grass, but the situation outside of the peach tree forest inside the valley. Several tens of low-grade spirit beasts had already gathered near the valley's restrictions, attempting to break through with all their power for the six-leaved rainbow skirt grass inside. Han Li was truly surprised by the number of low-grade spirit beasts in the Heaven Peak mountain range. However, he didn't pay them much regard and instead closed his eyes, facing the direction of the High Sun Palace. He reckoned the potency of the rainbow skirt grass would be enough to lure that grade 7 bird over. Furthermore, its speed should be much faster than ordinary magic treasures. It shouldn't be long before it arrives. Shortly after, Han Li's calm expression stirred and he opened his eyes. With a hand gesture and a snort, he suddenly released several magic seals from his hands, activating the outermost illusion formation in the valley. A layer of white light promptly emerged from the ground and instantly concealed the forest from view. At that moment, the wild and savage roars could be heard along with the clear cry of a bird. A huge yellow ball of light and a scarlet fireball simultaneously arrived above the valley, clearly bewitched by the rainbow skirt grass. When Han Li saw this, he let out a yelp and revealed an astonished expression. Chapter 933, Gathering Feathers. Han Li found two overbearing presences appear in front of the valley. The fireball faintly contained the silhouette of a bird. As for the ball of yellow light, it appeared to be a demon beast rolled up in a ball. Its body was covered in a thick, tough yellow hide. It was wrinkled and folded as if it were a layer of armor. And from within its fat body poked out a sharp rat's head and a slender tail. It appeared to be a huge demon mouse variant. What manner of strange demon beast is this? Han Li asked. An armored earth dragon. What an extremely rare spirit beast. Monarch Soul Divergence shouted with delight. It's widely known for its defensive prowess and ability to find treasures. It is fortunate that it has appeared before you. Oh, it's that beast. I had a feeling I recognized it. As soon as Han Li spoke, the two demon beasts charged into the valley's white mist one after another, aiming to acquire the rainbow skirt grass underneath within. In response, he summoned a green formation plate into his hand. With a slap, the plate glowed with bright light, raising the outermost layers of the valley's restrictions and trapping the vast young bird in the lead. The ball of yellow light hastily followed after it, but was blocked once the spell formation was activated. The armored earth dragon was furiously alarmed from the sudden obstruction, and its body shimmered with yellow light, expanding to the size of 24 meters. Layers upon layers of gray plate emerged from its body, and it rolled into a ball before fiercely knocking against the barrier. With a huge bang, the strike destroyed the two outermost layers of the restrictions. After a pause, the beast continued to strike away at the remaining restrictions. This short delay gave Han Li ample time to restrain the vast young bird. After the bird collided against the restrictions, it waved its wings and scattered scarlet fireballs all around it, dispersing most of the mist below it and revealing the forest filled with blooming peach trees. With a quick scan of its eyes, it quickly spotted Han Li and the source of its bewitchment, the rainbow skirt grass. Even without a fully developed intelligence, Han Li's unconcealed mid-nascent soul cultivation invoked fear in the bird. It circled above, not daring to stoop too low, but unable to escape the incredibly powerful enticement of the rainbow skirt grass. As the bird hesitated, Han Li expressionlessly raised his hand and a black talisman shot out. In a flicker of black light, the talisman turned into a black ghost claw and reached out to grab the vast young bird. The bird was deeply shocked, and without another thought, it released over 30 fist-sized fireballs with a flap of its wings. They ruptured against the ghost claw, covering the black light with raging inferno and disabling it for the time being. Astonished, Han Li soon formed an incantation gesture with his hands, and silver wings emerged from his back. With a ring of thunder, he disappeared without a trace, followed by his reappearance in a flash of silver light 10 meters above the bird's head. He then clapped his hands together with a gloomy expression before separating them to release two dense bolts of golden lightning from his palms, only for them to rupture midair and form a huge net of lightning. Devoting its attention on blocking the black ghost claw, the vast young bird was completely caught off guard and was trapped underneath the cackling net of lightning. In a panic, it shook its body to shed off a few of its feathers, turning into a dense fiery blaze that struck the net of lightning, followed by a chain of explosions. A cold glint appeared in Han Li's eyes when he saw this, and he shook his wrist, uttering, "Restrain." The large net of lightning wildly flashed and pushed against the flames as it closed in. In a brilliant display of golden light, the vast young bird was restrained by the thick, dense net of lightning. No matter how hard it attempted to escape, it couldn't make the slightest movement, causing it to let out a defeated cry. Han Li smiled in joy at the sight of this, but at that moment, he heard a huge explosion from above him. He raised his head in shock and saw that the armored earth dragon had finally broken through the layer of the restrictions he placed around the valley. He had to admit, his hastily placed spell formations were truly too weak to hold against a grade 7 demon beast. The dragon had uncurled itself from its armored ball state and charged into the valley, catching sight of Han Li and the vast young bird restricted in a prison of golden lightning. Its pair of small emerald eyes flickered about, and a clear expression of fear could be seen from its face. When Han Li saw this, his heart stirred. The armored earth dragon appeared quite intelligent. In spite of its fear, a trace of cunning was betrayed from its eyes when it saw the rainbow skirt grass on the ground. It shot towards the ground in a flicker of yellow light. "Stop it. It is capable of earth evasion techniques. You won't have a chance of capturing it once it reaches the ground," Monarch Soul Divergence warned. "Don't worry, I've already made arrangements," Han Li replied with a calm smile. When the dragon arrived on the ground and saw that there was nothing protecting the rainbow skirt grass, it gleefully pounced towards it with a wide open mouth. But in that instant, 12 streaks of sparkling icy chi suddenly shot out from the ground surrounding the grass. Well into the air, it was too slow to react and couldn't avoid being struck by the icy chi, sealing it in a layer of ice. White light flickered from the ground to reveal 12 half-foot-long snow-white centipedes. Icy chi trailed from their mouths. When Monarch Soul Divergence saw the frozen beast, he chuckled and said, "So you had your centipedes stationed around it. I had worried for nothing." The armored earth dragon was quite durable and hardy, but it wasn't enough to protect against the combined frost chi of 12 six-winged frost centipedes. It was no surprise the ambush was effective. Han Li indifferently said, "I set them there just in case. I hadn't expected that they would come across an armored earth dragon." With that said, he blurred and appeared behind the vast young bird, his eyes focused on the many of its tail feathers. He smiled at the bird and said, "I know you should be intelligent enough to understand a few of my words. I have no intention of harming you, so would you rather release your tail feathers, or have me rip them off?" The vast young bird clearly understood him. Its body trembled in response and it fiercely screeched in a display of unwilling resentment. Han Li's expression turned sullen and he coldly snorted. Without another word, he wrapped azure light around his hand and reached towards the bird's rear. A trace of fear appeared on the bird's eyes. Helpless, it could only shake all of its tail feathers off in a flicker of red light. These feathers were linked to its body's essence and blood vessels. If they were forcefully pulled out, its body would suffer quite a bit of damage. If it took the initiative to abandon them, it would still suffer a loss of strength, but it could avoid unnecessary injuries. Han Li was delighted to see this, and he caught all of the feathers in his hand. Then, he took out a jade box he had prepared and quickly placed them inside. With the lid of the box sealed with several talismans, he carefully put it away in his storage pouch. With that done, he placed his hand on top of the vast young bird's head and poured a bit of spiritual power into it, knocking it unconscious. He let out a smile and turned his attention to the frozen armored earth dragon. Although the demon beast was trapped in a thick layer of ice, it was still conscious. As such, its small eyes betrayed terror when it saw that Han Li had turned his attention toward him. Han Li then flew down in a streak of azure light. A quarter-hour later, a band of brilliant gold light arrived above the valley at the speed of lightning. It circled once in the air before fading away to reveal the old purple-robed woman that was previously in the High Sun Palace's secret hall. At her side stood an extremely solemn Fang Chu, who stifled his breath in an attempt to attract less attention. At that moment, the restrictions covering the blooming peach tree forest in the valley had completely disappeared. There was simply an unconscious vast young bird that had its tail feathers plucked lying beneath a tree. When the old woman saw this, she swept her spiritual sense across it in alarm. Although she found that the bird had suffered a loss in strength from its missing tail feathers, she grew relaxed. But after she took another look at the bird's rear, anger bloomed in her heart. "Take a look at the bird and see if you can awaken it," the old woman commanded with a serious tone. When Fang Chu heard this, he repeatedly nodded in a display of complete obedience and hurriedly flew down. If it weren't for the High Sun Palace's ancestor finding him along the way, he wouldn't have been able to reach this location at this speed. The old woman was looking around her, and with some thought, she closed her eyes and slowly released her spiritual sense to search for the impudent culprit of this act. A short moment later, her expression changed as if she suddenly found something. She hurriedly barked orders to Fang Chu down below and hurriedly flew off in a golden streak of light. Once she was over 100 kilometers away, she stopped a strange-looking cultivator that was about to leave the mountain range. Brimming with suspicion, the old woman coldly asked, "Look who I found, it's fellow Daoist Ma of the Devilwood sect. Why aren't you peacefully cultivating at your sect? Why have you stealthily arrived at our Heaven Peak mountain range? Was the demon beast's uproar your doing?" She was speaking to a masked yellow-robed cultivator. His eyes had an inhuman golden glow. Chapter 934, Undercurrents. The masked cultivator let out a dry laugh and spoke with a fearful tone. "Fellow Daoist son, You've arrived quickly, but I'm afraid you found the wrong person. I was only chasing after a demon beast and had mistakenly entered your mountain range. I also witnessed the uproar of low-grade demon beasts and was trying to find the cause of it as well." As purple light covered the old woman's face, she snorted and spoke with an imposing voice. "You were chasing a demon beast? Does fellow Daoist Ma think that I've gone senile? You're a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator well known throughout the Empire for your movement techniques. What beast would have you pursue it to our Heaven Peak mountain range? I've already searched the area of over 100 kilometers around us, and apart from you, I wasn't able to find any other cultivators that were capable of what had just happened." What happened? Could it be that the demon beast uproar damaged the High Sun Palace in some manner? I respect late nascent soul seniors such as yourself as shown from my politeness, but I can't help but think that you're framing me. Although I might not prove to be your opponent, I'm not helpless either. There are a few disciples in my sect that know I entered the Heaven Peak mountain range. It'd be better for you to give it another thought before you provoke a war between the righteous and devilish Tao. Although the masked cultivator appeared fearful at the idea of a fight, he was unyielding and golden light began to shine from his eyes. The old woman narrowed her eyes and after a long while, she coldly asked, "You truly didn't do it?" The masked man relaxed after hearing her and he assumed a submissive attitude. "If fellow Daoist's son needs me to, I can swear a devil heart oath, but I still don't know what happened to your sect." The old woman's expression relaxed and said, "Fellow Daoist doesn't need to swear an oath. You shouldn't be the one who did it. With your position in the Devilwood sect, you wouldn't have done something disgraceful of your rank. Besides, I've never heard that you have the abilities to attract demon beasts. But since your esteemed self came over to our Heaven Peak mountain range to find a demon beast, it must be quite rare. How about you tell me about it?" Knowing that he had to tell the truth to free himself of suspicion, he hastily explained, "The demon beast is truly rare, but I fear it isn't nearly on the same level as your sect's vast young bird. It was an armored earth dragon that had just ascended to grade 7. I discovered it in a mountain in the adjacent province, but it was extremely clever and was proficient in earth movement techniques. I've chased it for nearly a week before arriving here." "A grade 7 armored earth dragon," the old woman shouted in astonishment. "That truly is a rare demon beast, especially one at such a high grade. It is no wonder why fellow Daoist Ma was so rash. Now that fellow Daoist had departed, does that mean you had captured it? I've long heard of the beast's fame, but I've never been able to see it with my own eyes. Could you give me a look?" "I fear I must disappoint you, fellow Daoist Sunday. In the demon beast uproar, my secret technique suddenly lost effect and I could no longer track the beast down. But, a glint appeared in the old woman's eyes. But just as I was looking for the beast, I saw a streak of azure light pierce through the sky. It was rather quick and didn't appear to belong to a cultivator from your palace. I reckon they had something to do with the strange uproar in the mountain range. I was thinking about pursuing them and figuring out what had happened, but it were too fast. I lost sight of it after a moment. Then, fellow Daoist son found me." The masked man let out a wry laugh. The old woman's expression stirred and she quickly asked, "An azure streak, and you said that they were just here? Which direction did they go?" The masked cultivator blinked and calmly answered, "They flew out of the mountain range. With your abilities, you might be able to pursue them." With a new trail acquired, she quickly uttered, "Many thanks, fellow Daoist Ma. I will be taking a look for myself. And since that armored earth dragon disappeared, you should leave the mountain range as well. Our sects and allegiances are at odds and have their own territories. When I return, I don't want you see lingering here." Then she took off in a stream of golden light. When the masked man saw her fade into the horizon, he let out a sneer and muttered, "That old witch is as hard to deal with as the rumors said." After she acquired the information she wanted, she immediately turned hostile. "Our sects are at odds? Ha, you just want to take the armored earth dragon for yourself. If I sensed it correctly, that azure streak should have something to do with the disappearance of the armored earth dragon. And the speed was no less than a late nascent soul stage cultivator. It won't be easy to chase them down." She also appeared quite flustered when she arrived, as if that other cultivator had made the High Sun Palace suffer quite a bit. What a happy affair. He then lowered his head to look at the spirit beast pouch at his waist. With a smile, he muttered, "Although it's not the armored earth dragon, I did acquire a blackblood spider, making the trip quite worth it." That dragon's appearance was rather convenient for that person. He drove it mad using some unknown method. The masked man suddenly raised his head and then muttered, "Actually, it must have been a method of attracting demon beasts. I'll have to quickly report this to Senior Marshal Brother Moo." After looking around him one last time, he surrounded himself in green light and tore through the skies. The old woman surnamed Sun flew out for nearly half a day and continuously swept her spiritual sense past thousands of kilometers, but she hadn't discovered anything suspicious. Helpless, she could only return and quickly suppressed information of what had happened. If the other sects found out, the High Sun Palace would become a laughingstock. Fortunately, the person who acted against the vast young bird only took away its tail feathers instead of killing it. Given 30 years and many spirit medicines, it should fully recover its strength. As a result, she could only bottle up her grievances, but in private, she had dispatched a small group of elite disciples to investigate if there were nascent soul-stage eccentrics that were looking to refine a treasure that used the vast young bird's feathers. In addition to gaining revenge for the spirit bird, she also wanted to find this person to acquire the method to attract demon beasts. If she could obtain it, taming demon beasts or acquiring their cores would be a simple and easy matter. Of course, she wasn't the only one with that in mind. The Devilwood sect had also sent out many of their own disciples to see if any unfamiliar nascent soul cultivators had recently appeared near the Long Province. The hidden actions of the province's two superpowers frightened a few of the shrewder clans and sects in the region. They all guessed that the balance of the region would soon collapse, and that war between the two great sects would occur. As various smaller powers were panicking, forming alliances, and withdrawing from the region, the atmosphere of the entire Long Province grew tense. Of course, Han Li had no idea that his actions would provoke such an outcome. At that moment, he had established a temporary stone room on top of a nameless mountain to examine the spoils he acquired, the 5 near-illusory flaming feathers. In a rather good mood, Monarch Soul Divergence idly said, "The woman who chased you at the end should have been the High Sun Palace's late nascent soul cultivator. While her cultivation was exceptional, her spiritual sense was rather ordinary and she wasn't able to detect you after you restrained your qi. Else, it could have proven quite troublesome." Han Li chuckled and said, "At worst, I'd only have to use blood shadow evasion once. I don't believe there is another sacred beast incarnation in this world that I could run into. However, I did have no choice but to hide. That old woman cultivated a movement technique that was quite faster than mine. Of course, and it also appears the risks you took have paid off. Not only have you acquired this many flame feathers, but a rare armored earth dragon as well. If you can tame it, there will be a high chance to acquire other worldly treasures in the future." Monarch Soul Divergence said with satisfaction. "That's right, but this demon beast is fully grown. How can it be easily tamed? I'll only be able to succeed due to luck." "It is no matter. Taming a fully grown demon beast actually isn't as difficult as one would imagine. Highly intelligent ones are particularly easy to tame." Monarch Soul Divergence spoke with a calm tone filled with experience. Han Li raised his brow and revealed a trace of surprise. "Oh, so it was like that. You'll find out. From how intelligent this armored earth dragon appears, it shouldn't be too difficult to tame." "I hope so," Han Li chuckled, "but I had better first wear down the beast's temper and then find a better time to tame it. First, I'll handle these flame feathers and then head to the Jin capital's trade fair. It's time to see what the greatest city in the Jin Empire is like. I visited the Jin capital once in the past. Although it was a city of mortals, it was quite imposing and unordinary." Monarch Soul Divergence praised. "I want to see the Jin capital even more now. Fortunately, we're not too far away. Treating the feathers should only take a day. 3 months should be more than enough time for me to arrive." Han Li calmly said. Following a flash of azure light, all but one of the feathers disappeared without a trace. Han Li flung the remaining feather in the air, breathing a cloud of azure nascent flame upon it. Suddenly, the feather lit up in a gorgeous display of blue and red light. He then shut his eyes and sat down cross-legged as he grasped his hands in an incantation gesture and sank into meditation. Chapter 935, Unexpected Encounter. A day passed, and Han Li emerged from the stone room to depart from the mountain, heading to the eastern half of the Jin Empire, where the largest city of the mortal world was located, the Jin capital. With quite a bit of time left before the trade fair started, Han Li leisurely flew at the speed of an ordinary core formation cultivator to avoid suspicion. Soon, he left the Long province and entered the neighboring territory without a problem, then taking out the wind-riding chariot and flying off at immense speed in a streak of white light. As he flew, he faintly revealed the aura of his nascent soul cultivation, and the few low-grade cultivators he occasionally flew across respectfully kept their distance. A month later, Han Li entered the Xinjiang province adjacent to the Jin capital. He put away the wind-riding chariot and once again flew with restricted speed and aura. After all, there were sure to be many high-grade cultivators in the heartland of the great Jin Empire. He didn't wish to attract unnecessary attention. 2 weeks later, Han Li was wearing azure Confucian robes as he rode on a worn cart pulled by a sickly old horse. At that moment, he was sitting at the front of the raggedy cart and his body shook along with it. His eyes were half closed as if he were nodding off. In truth, he was secretly refining the Soul Snow Pill, one he took from several days before. After he emerged from the spatial pocket in Devilfall Valley, he had already taken over a dozen of them. The pill was worthy of being from antiquity. He clearly sensed an enhanced purity in the celestial ice flames and six-winged frost centipede's glacial chi that he previously refined. Even the trace of impurities that remained in the purple apex flames began to slowly disappear, producing a significant increase in their potency. It was only quite unfortunate that the medicine pill wasn't easy to consume. Each one would take anywhere from 3 to 4 months to refine inside of him, much to Han Li's disappointment. If he was able to consume a pill every month, he reckoned that in 100 years' time, his purple apex flames could reach the legendary stage of sealing 1,000 kilometers of land in ice. That being said, the purple apex flames currently was no lesser than the peak techniques of the devil and righteous Tao. There didn't seem to be an ability that would able to truly restrain them. As for why Han Li was traveling across the land on this worn carriage, it was because the Jin capital was the mortal capital of the empire. The great Jin cultivation world had an unwritten rule that forbade combat and flying 500 kilometers within the Jin capital, signifying a trace of respect towards the great Jin's imperial government, as cultivators and mortals had a certain degree of codependency in the great Jin. However, nascent soul and even core formation cultivators skilled in evasion techniques would turn a blind eye to this rule. After all, as the only ones patrolling the Jin capital were often vagrant cultivators hired by the great Jin's imperial government, their cultivation usually wouldn't be very high. So long as they didn't discover anybody violating the rules or didn't brazenly fly at low altitudes in plain sight, they often wouldn't raise a problem. Han Li also viewed this rule with disregard, but because he had ample time and wished to finish refining a snow soul pill, he dropped to a small village 100 kilometers away and bought an old horse and cart before leisurely making his way to the capital. Han Li encountered a few low-grade cultivators along the way that were using horseback and carriages to head towards the capital. However, he didn't wish to be disturbed and completely restrained his magic power, making himself appear like an ordinary mortal. As a result, none of these low-grade cultivators had bothered Han Li in the slightest. And because his cart wasn't going particularly fast, he had been passed by at least 10 different caravans. Though Han Li simply minded his own business on the road as he refined a soul snow pill, he frowned when heard a storm of thunderous horse hooves in the distance. With an unchanged expression, he opened his eyes and pulled at the reins in his lap. The old horse obediently pulled over the cart to the side of the road. Han Li lazily turned his head over and saw a cloud of dust surging from behind him. There were banners fluttering within the dust as if in a display of might. As the dust cloud approached him, he could faintly see cavalrymen clad in silver armor within them, each of them with bows hanging on their backs and sabers on their waist. These soldiers appeared rough and weathered, and they were led by a middle-aged man wearing embroidered robes and a long sword at his waist. He carried a large banner at his back with the word King boldly written on it. At the middle of the cavalrymen, there were several jade carriages faintly shining with spiritual light, being swiftly pulled by many fine steeds. The carriages didn't appear to be shaking despite the great speed they were traveling at. Magic tools. When Han Li saw the carriages, his eyes turned wide with astonishment. He swept his spiritual sense past them and found all carriages were filled with luggage apart from one that carried the faint aura of cultivators. Although the aura was quite weak, it was quite surprising for common cultivators to mingle amongst these soldiers. He then pulled at his reins and had his cart come to a complete stop, yielding to the group. The army of cavalrymen appeared to number about 400, but when they passed him by, they seemed to shake his cart in a storm of wind produced by their astonishing momentum. Han Li's eyes flickered and noticed that these cavalrymen all carried baleful qi on their body, from fighting presumably. These weren't ordinary city guards, but rather frontier vanguards that would often take part in bloody melees. He heard that the Great Jin were bordered by other unsavory civilizations in the southeast and northwest, and that mortal natives would often wage war with them. Only true-blooded soldiers would appear in these chaotic areas. Just as Han Li thought this, the jade carriages passed him by. Someone within one of the carriages happened to catch sight of him from the window's narrow opening, and they let out a slight yelp. Han Li seemed surprised by this reaction, and he couldn't help but raise his head, catching sight of a pair of eyes that seemed familiar. Just as he wondered who that person was, they had already traveled into the distance. After observing the squad of soldiers that passed him, Han Li grew pensive and eventually shook his head, abandoning his thoughts of searching the carriage with his spiritual sense. The carriage had a few simple isolation restrictions placed on it, and he would be detected by whoever was inside if he attempted to pry. Additionally, they were cultivators only at the qi condensation cultivation. He didn't want to be bothered because of a few low-grade cultivators. After seeing the cavalrymen travel far into the distance, Han Li resumed his journey on the main road. He traveled for 5 kilometers before he arrived at an intersection in the road. A large verdant forest grew at the side of the road, and there were a few simple tea shops that were set up next to it. There were many carriages that had stopped here, whose owners entered these simple shops for tea and food. After all, this place was the sole stop before one would arrive inside the Jin capital. Most travelers would stop by for a moment of rest. Han Li's gaze swept around and saw that the silver-armored cavalrymen had dismounted from their horses and were resting at the side of the forest. The several jade carriages had stopped as well, but one of them was opened and empty. As for the silver-robed middle-aged man in charge, he was also absent. Han Li frowned and unconsciously swept his spiritual sense past the many tea shops nearby. Soon after, he urged his horse to continue on the road. But at that moment, one of the soldiers saw his cart and walked towards him in stride, blocking the cart to Han Li's surprise. The cavalryman saluted him and asked with a neutral tone, "Young sir, are you surnamed Han?" "That's right. My surname is Han. Do you have any business with me?" "Since it truly is young Sir Han, my clan's young mistress would like to have a chat with you over some tea." Recalling the pair of bright eyes he saw earlier from the jade carriage and pondering for a moment, Han Li nodded. "Your clan's young mistress? Oh. All right, I'll go." "Young sir, my clan's young miss is in the tea shop over there. Please follow me." The soldier spoke in a deep voice and beckoned to the side of the forest. Then, 2 other soldiers came over and took care of Han Li's cart. A short moment later, Han Li entered the shop and came across 2 women and 1 man. The man was the embroidered-robed middle-aged man he saw from before. He had long facial hair and a calm, powerful demeanor. As for the other 2 young women, they were cultivators at the 7th and 5th layer of qi condensation. The man remained motionless at Han Li's entrance, but when the 2 women saw Han Li enter, they exchanged a glance. The woman with the lesser cultivation bit her lip and then spoke with some joy. "Brother Han, it has been many years since I've seen you. I didn't think I'd be able to meet you again. I will never forget the kindness you showed me with your cultivation guidance." Surprised, Han Li smiled and said, "So it was young Miss Cao. This is truly a coincidence. I hope you didn't take offense at my sudden departure." This woman was the county officer's daughter, Cao Mangrong, who he had met when he entered the Great Jin several years prior. "I'm sure Senior Han had urgent business at the time, so I could hardly blame you." "Ah, that's right, I should introduce you. This is Senior Marshal Sister Wang. She had taken care of me when I was still in my sect. We are nearly as close as blood sisters. And this is Senior Marshal Sister Wang's uncle, a general renowned as the illustrious pillar of the Southern Empire. He has received orders to pay audience to the Emperor." 1. an ancient pill formula that requires equivalently ancient and rare medicine herbs. In Chapter 856, Han Li finds these herbs in a spatial pocket in Devil Fall Valley. They are able to enhance the glacial power of a cultivator's ice techniques.